Hello, I'm still not Dr. Alan Campbell, but this is still Tea and Biscuits and Murder. And we're still listening to former policeman Steve Hodel talk about how his father, Dr. George Hodel, was a bad egg and all round evil genius. Killing, 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 and more killing. That's Dr. George Hodel. Shall we share the screen? Yes, we shall.
So I'm long retired. I'm 14 years retired from LAPD. I'm doing my PI work up in Bellingham. I get the phone call, go down, do all the things you have to do to take care of a father that's just passed.
Uh-oh. I'm afraid Dr. Hodel has stuffed it. Mm-hmm.
And June gives me this small book of photographs. It's just like 3 by 5.
Ed, you interrupted Detective Hodel again. I don't know what to do. My father was a remarkable man. You have to understand that.
Family. But everything fell to you to take care of the funeral arrangements and all of the wills and probate and all that kind of stuff.
Well, he was...
Ed, no. Ed did not take care of the... Steve did not take care of the estate. Let's see what he says. The answer should be quite interesting because, no, Steve didn't do that. Someone else did.
Like I said, for whatever reasons, I had become his favorite son, go figure. And he wasn't in contact with family. He was a very mysterious man. He was kind of like a man in a...
Did you notice how Steve didn't answer the question? Steve, did you take care of your father's estate? Answer, well, you have to... And the answer is no. And how do I know that? Because the records are online. I have that stuff. No, Steve didn't administer his dad's estate. No, it was somebody else. Oh, dear.
Iron mask, behind an iron mask. Very mysterious, and didn't have contact with any other than me. I was about...
Okay, then wait a minute. Out of 11 kids...
Ed, you're interrupting Steve Hodel. What are you doing, you rude boy?
He had 11 kids total?
Yeah.
Out of 11 kids, he chose to reconnect and become best buddies with a homicide detective's son.
Isn't that amazing? Now, you know, there are intimations that George was stalking some of the members of the family. Especially if you watch I Am the Night or if you listen to Root of Evil, there's some material in there about how George Hodel was stalking various other members of the family. Steve doesn't get into any of that. I'm not saying that those stories are correct. They're probably not. But Steve's response here is interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, as we get into the psychology of George Hodel, I mean, I think he really saw it as...
Did you notice how Steve didn't answer the question? He just blew it off. And if Ed were any kind of interviewer, he would nail him on it, but he didn't.
Part of his own, I think he was, can you imagine? I grew up and completely unaware of any of this and became a...
I didn't know my father at all. We were very close. Yeah. How awkward.
Big city homicide detective, and he considered himself a master criminal.
No, he didn't. Neither of those things are true. Steve Hodel was a homicide detective in the homicide division. Yeah, that part is true. Was he ever part of RHD? No, he was not. He worked homicide out of the Hollywood division his whole career. George was not a jet set serial killer. So really, nah. A lot of inflation going on there.
And so basically, I think he was kind of getting off on the taunting and the stuff. You know,
Yeah.
Clearly, he knew that I didn't have a clue I never suspected anything. I had no knowledge. So I didn't even know who I didn't even know. I knew.
I didn't know who she was, except I had seen the pictures at the police academy, and I'd seen the TV movie with Lucy Arnaz. But I didn't know anything about. I didn't even know her name.
Black Dahlia was a famous unsolved from the 40s, but you know, I was in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I was looking at
Part of the new breed. I think that's your line, Steve.
the present, the future, not the past. I didn't even know her name. Elizabeth Short. So anyway, she gives me the book, and I'm going through it, and there's photographs of my family members, my brothers, my mother, friends.
Now, is he going to say the photographs are by his dad, or is he going to say they're by Man Ray? Because he tells both versions. But we'll see. Listen for that.
And then there's a picture of a young, attractive, dark-haired.
Oh, was she nude from the waist up, Steve? Because you know what? Did you see what he did? There are two photographs. And if you are a longtime follower of Shake That Moneymaker, you will know that there were two photographs. Like here. See? Two photographs. And Steve originally claimed both pictures were Elizabeth Short in Shake That Moneymaker, the original version. Now he's changed it to just one woman looked familiar. I wonder why that is. Well, the reason that is because the other woman recognized herself and told Steve, hey, that's me. That's not Elizabeth Short, idiot.
Woman, nude.
Now you see, you can't see that she's nude. You can't see anything. It just pleases Steve to say that she's nude in some weird Steve Hodelness.
And I looked at June and I said, who is this? She looked at it. She says, I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago. So I'm thinking, why do I know this? It looks familiar to me, this face. Why do I know it? And maybe it was the style of the 40s and stuff. I'm not quite sure why, but Black Dahlia comes to mind. And
why does Black Dahlia come to mind? Because Shake That Moneymaker. That's why Black Dahlia comes to mind. I'm going to cash in on the old boy. Yes.
And I had seen a TV film called Who is the Black Dahlia that was made in the 70s. And and that might have been the connection. But anyway.
Yeah, that might have been the connection, except for what you're remembering, Steve, is not Elizabeth Short at all. It's Lucy Arnaz playing Elizabeth Short. So that's what you're remembering is not Elizabeth Short, not the Black Dahlia at all. It is Lucy Arnaz. Kind of a tough sell, don't you think, amigo?
I don't know what the source was on it. But then about 5 days later, I'm talking to Tamar, my half-sister.
We're remembering the great man. This is the great man who molested Tamar, and she testified against him in court. But suddenly she develops this tremendous respect for Dad. Mm-hmm. Or is it? Shake That Moneymaker. This is where we get Tamar. What the hell are you talking about?
Who's living in Hawaii. We're talking about the great man and his passing and what a remarkable human being he was and how we were all kind of in awe of him.
And she says, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia case. He didn't do it.
And there's people out there that...
Wait, but wasn't she a victim of his, she's still...
Ed, now you're starting to be a good interviewer. What the hell is your problem? You don't ask questions like that of Detective 3 Steve Hodel.
Okay.
Yes, and that's not uncommon. A
lot of
incest, love the father. That.
Sure they do, Steve. Yeah, sure. Yeah, they do. Haha, did you notice the weird laugh? You noticed it, didn't you? Or should I play it again? I'll play it again. Let's hear Steve's weird laugh again. Shall we?
He still loved it?
Yes, and that's not uncommon. A lot of
Yeah.
Victims of incest, love the father. That doesn't change. Despite the horror they went through, there's still a part of them that loves the man, and it's very complex. But she, there was a part of her that loved him and idolized him like most of his children. So we're talking, and then she says that comes out of nowhere. And
Tamar, what the hell are you talking about?
Says, well, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And I said, what are you talking about, Tamar? What are you talking about? And she says, yeah, but he didn't do it. But he said, the police thought he did it back then. And she said, when I was, picked up and placed in custody, the police told me that they thought he was a suspect in the Dahlia murder.
Now, wait a minute. The police told her, did he say which police told her? Let's see.
Thought he did it back then. And she said, when I was, picked up and placed in custody, the police told me that they thought he was a suspect in the Dahlia murder.
Really? Really? They did. I'm willing to bet they didn't tell her that. I'm willing to bet that's part of the story is utter bullshit.
And now, Tamar, we've been past 50 years we've known each other, but I'd only had about 10 or 15 minutes conversation with Tamar during that 50 years.
Oh, Steve, now you used to say it's half an hour. Which is it? 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour? Poor Tamar, if she were only still alive, what would she say about you? I wonder.
She kind of, after the incest and stuff, she kind of spun out. And
sex, drugs, rock and roll, I think, is the line coming here, Steve.
And got into drug, sex, rock and roll, went to San Francisco, and I went, obviously, a different direction.
Right. Wasn't she connected in some ways to the mamas and the papas or one of the Phillips kids?
Yeah, her best friend to this day, one of her closest friends is Michelle Phillip.
Her best friend to this day. Well, Tamar is not with us anymore, so I'm not sure when this thing was done. But Tamar is snuffed it, so Steve can say anything he wants to.
So the mamas and papas. So she got into the whole San Francisco scene and all of that.
Wasn't she from San Francisco, Steve? Why, yes, she was, now that you mention it.
And had three sons, and I went a different direction.
Let me point out that all of Tamar's kids say she's a liar and manipulator, because you're never going to hear that from Steve, but that's what they say. Well, you didn't mention Fauna either. I guess we're trying to still rehabilitate Tamar rather than saying, oh, well, she just handed off her baby to a washroom attendant in Nevada. Kind of hard to recover from that one. Kind of hard for her to, still see her as a victim. But anyway, all right, Detective Hodel, proceed.
So, like I say, we've had maybe 10 or 20 minutes talking.
Usually say half an hour, Steve. Come on.
50 years. So.
Weird laugh. Weird laugh.
So there was that. So then I started looking into the crack, which I knew nothing about.
I didn't know anything about it except I'd seen the photographs at the police academy and I'd seen this whole TV movie about her, but I didn't know anything. And with my experience, I was going to clear my dad in 30 minutes. It would be easy. Of course, that had been done years before, but Steve is going to exonerate his dad, except actually shake that moneymaker with dear old Dad.
And so the photograph was a strong resemblance. I have on my website, I have photos that you can see.
Yeah, Steve has a lot to say about the one photograph. Let me point out, number one, Elizabeth Short's family says that photograph isn't her. And Steve will talk all the way around it. He will say, well, it doesn't matter if it's her or not because it just served to get me interested in the case. But on the other hand, German facial recognition software says 95% sure that it's her, but it doesn't matter. But it's her, but it doesn't matter. It's her. Yeah. Do go on, Detective Hodel.
Fair And then I discover, and starting doing the research and investigation on the Black Dahlia, that there was a surgeon that did it. Well, I knew Dad was a surgeon, but
No. This is more of the Steve Hodel lore that George Hodel was a surgeon. He was not. He never was a practicing surgeon. And Steve relies on the absolute ignorance of his audience to believe this because they know nothing about the medical profession. George Hodel had the minimum instruction in surgery to graduate from medical school, and that's all. So no, he was not a surgeon.
there was no way that at that point, back in '99, that I thought that he would have been a killer. I thought, well, this is crazy, but it's...
Shake that moneymaker.
There's no way he could have been, I knew he had his problems and the sex stuff, but there's no way he was an evil.
I had to clear my dad, who had been cleared years before, because, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Does anybody believe this bullshit?
Murderer, that couldn't be. I love my father. And
another laugh. Did you hear that? Let's hear that again.
But his problems and the sex stuff, but there's no way he was an evil murderer. That couldn't be. I love my father. There's no way he could have been, I knew he had his problems and the sex stuff, but there's no way he was an evil murderer. That couldn't be. I love my father.
That is the classic example of Steve Hodel's weird laugh. Okay. Let's go on.
And but, there was a surgeon.
There was a surgeon.
And then my girlfriend's living in LA, and she starts sending me up all the headlines from the 1940 newspapers, a whole bunch of them. And one of them has got this huge note on the front page. It's the note I referred to, handwritten by, it said, turning myself in on January 29th. That's my phone.
I recognized my dad's handwriting. Now, let me point out that unlike most people, I have a sample of George Hodel's handwriting, and it looks nothing at all like that postcard. Nothing.
Please sign Black Dahlia Avenger. And I looked at it. It's my father's handwriting.
Did you hear the laugh again? Did you hear that? Okay. I'm going to have to go in and cut in the postcard, and then going to have to cut in the postcard and George Hodel's handwriting, because it looks nothing like that at all. Even in the untrained eye, it looks nothing at all like that.
Wow.
Wow. Wow, Steve, you're so full of shit.
I said, and it's the only one that's undisguised. And I said, this can't be. How is this possible? And I'm thinking, well, maybe he was pretending to be the suspect. Maybe he knew the killer. What's going on here? So, and then, of course, the search,
What's going on here? I can tell you. It's called Shake That Moneymaker, Steve. That's what's going on.
Things all together, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to have to relocate back to LA.
Man on a mission.
And take a serious look at this. And I was sure that I would be able to,
in 30 minutes, right away.
In a year or so, if I follow through, I'd be able to establish they had nothing to do with any of this. So that's what I did. I packed up and moved back to here to Los Angeles in '99, and got heavy into the weeds. Started, doing all the things, finding as many witnesses as I could.
You know what Steve Hodel did not do? He did not go to the LAPD and say, "Hello, I'm retired homicide detective Steve Hodel, 300 solves, highest solve rate in the Hollywood division. Can I please see Dad's police file on the Black Dahlia, please?" He didn't do that. Steve Hodel never, ever, ever asked to see his dad's file before he wrote Black Dahlia Avenger. Why not? Why wouldn't he do that? Why wouldn't he ask to see the file? Because he knew that there was nothing in it? Because he knew that would exonerate his dad? Whatever reason, he never asked. And you know what? They would have showed it to him. if he had asked them before he wrote the book. Now he'll never see it, but that's Steve Hodel for you.
Interviewing them. And the more I got into it, the more doors opened.
Oh, I followed the evidence. I made a U-turn.
And the more and more it started coming together. His handwriting and witnesses, it was clear that, the descriptions, and then I got into the investigation of the crimes. And I discovered, surprisingly, that it wasn't just the one murder.
Oh, no, there were a whole bunch of murders. Now, did you notice, were you paying attention, unlike Ed Opperman, where Steve Hodel said the murder was unique? Now he's going to say that there are a whole bunch like it. Notice that. It's unique, but there's a whole bunch like that. Welcome to Steve World.
There was a series, of course, they didn't have the term serial killer back then, but they called it
chain murder.
Chain murders. But it was very clear the LAPD was investigating many of these
leftovers.
Okay, that's an ad.
That occurred from 1940.
For more, save one and save from work.
Absolutely. There was
okay. We got a break coming up. We got a break coming up. This is that long break I was telling you about. We'll be back around a minute after 6. We're with Steve Hodel, SteveHodel.com, author, and LAPD detective, 300 homicide cases. Steve, just pick up where you left off.
Okay, so basically what I've written on...
Picking up meaning literally picking up. We're picking up after Steve Hodel. Okay.
Her nude body, an obscenity, F.U., and he signed it.
Wait. I think we might have missed something important here.
Nude on a detailed Angeles from 1940. Okay, so basically when getting into the weeds of the investigation, I discovered that there are a whole bunch of unsolved lone woman murders in Los Angeles from 1940 to 1950.
Yeah. None of them are like Elizabeth Short, which Steve said was unique, but they're just like it. Yeah. Okay. All right, Detective Hodel, please proceed.
About 10 heavy-duty ones that I feel that Dad was responsible for, and for a whole bunch of reasons. We don't have time to go into detail each one, but let's just take so 3 weeks after the Black Dahlia murder.
Oh, it's going to be the murder of Jean French. Okay, February 10th, 1947, Jean French. Jean French was killed. She was in a car with a guy, parked in kind of a remote area, and he started beating on her. He hit her with something like the handle of a socket wrench. She either fell or got pushed out of the car, and he stomped on her. What happened is he stomped on her until one of her ribs broke and punctured her heart, and that killed her. And I should point out, because you'll never hear it from Steve, that the killer left heel prints, shoe prints all around the body. And would you believe that there were castings made and photographs made of those shoe prints? And would you believe they know exactly what size shoes the guy wore? And would you believe they were little shoes, unlike George Hodel, who wore big shoes? And if the shoe don't fit, you must acquit. Not in Steve World.
A woman is found posed.
She wasn't posed. That's wrong.
Semi-nude.
I think she was nude. I think she was.
On a vacant lot, and the killer has taken a lipstick and written on her nude body an obscenity, F.U., and he signed it BD for Black Dahlia.
Okay, now there is some contention about this. When you look at the photographs, and I've seen them, and I think they're even floating around the internet, it looks like that. It does. I admit it. It looks like that. The file on Jean French and I have been told by an LAPD homicide detective that it actually says, fuck you, PD, as in police department, not BD as in Black Dahlia. I present both things. When I look at the photographs, it's like, yeah, it kind of looks like that. The people who saw the body say, nope, said PD. So there you have it.
And this was 3 weeks after the Elizabeth Short Dahlia murder. And he's taunting the police, poses the body.
Not posed.
Stomped to death. Not cut in half, cut a whole bunch.
Yeah, stomped to death, just like Elizabeth Short, right, Steve? They're just the same, except her murder was unique, and she would.
Other things, and basically the newspapers and the police link it and say this is the same killer and stuff.
No, they don't. They do not do that. What the newspapers did, as they often do, and they still do that, if there is a big event of news, like a big protest march or a big storm or a big wildfire, newspapers the second or third day, they will run a long story of, here's the other big storms, or here's the other big mudslides, or here's the other, list of murders. And it's just a way to kind of fill and titillate the readers, but doesn't mean the papers thought those were related. It just means here's a whole bunch of unsolved killings. That is Steve imposing the "I want Dad to be a serial killer" on these events.
And in the next 7 years, 8 years before Dad split, 3 years before Dad.
Math was never his strong point, obviously.
Dad splits. There's about 6 more, and a whole bunch of these have a note, a taunting note left with them or sent in taunting the police.
Let me point out, because again, you will never hear this from Steve, writing notes to the police and to the newspapers was a thing to do in the 1940s. There was a lot of it, even earlier. You see crackpot mail. It was common. It was a thing to do.
Well, I've had 300 murder investigations, and in 0 of those have I ever had the suspect send in a note.
Well, that's because you weren't working in the 1940s, Steve, as I think you pointed out.
Very unusual, very rare.
Nope, common. Happened all the time.
And in 6 of these 10, he's left a note. So clearly it's a serial killer. And LAPD was investigating it as all connected.
No, they weren't. That's another lie. One of so many.
That's part of the myth that would later come out. There's 3 myths that I blow up in my books. And
poof! Poof! If there's anything Steve likes to do, it's blow up myths. Yeah.
And one was Elizabeth Short's missing week. Supposedly she disappeared for a week. That didn't happen.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Let's talk about Elizabeth Short's missing week for a moment. Steve would have you believe that, the homicide detectives in those days, they were really a bunch of idiots. Do you think they ever read the newspaper stories to say, oh, we saw her here. Oh, we saw her here. No, they investigated all of those and more that have never been made public. There were lots of alleged reported sightings of Elizabeth Short that the public knows nothing about. They investigated every one of those. They never found anybody who could say definitely, oh yeah, that was her. As a matter of fact, well, let's let Steve go with this story and see where he goes. I think I know where he's going here, but let's see.
And the second is this myth of a standalone murder, none before, none after.
That's true.
That wasn't true.
Yes, it is true. Nothing like it.
And the third was LAPD never solved it.
Yeah, no, the LAPD never said. Those are 3 myths. Those are 3 facts. Those are 3 details. Those are only myths in Steve World, the parallel reality where his father did all the unsolved killings on the planet.
And which is also untrue, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So I have these, but I've actually come up with about 20 different murders that are suspicious. So I break them down into.
Steve's up to 50. Dad was very busy killing. Killing.
Categories. Category 1 is what I consider to be definites. Category 2 is possibles or probables, and then 3 is possibles. So I lay them all out.
Does he get any that are like, no way, that wasn't Dad?
And I put my case together, and I go in secret to the head deputy.
Yeah, see now, Steve does everything in secret. He didn't want anybody to know. And I should point out, because again, Steve won't tell you, he wrote, shake that moneymaker. Steve wrote that book in total secrecy. He didn't tell anybody what he was doing. He didn't go to the LAPD and ask about it. He didn't tell anybody in his family exactly what he was doing. They knew he was kind of working on some sort of memoir, but that was it. He went to Stephen Kay, who was with the district attorney's office. Stephen Kay is going to say, oh yeah, big air quotes here, based on this evidence, which is crap, I would file on Elizabeth Short and Gene French. There might be others, but I would file on those two. And I'll have more to say about Steve Kay later.
One of the head deputy DAs here in Los Angeles, a guy named Steve Kay, highly respected, probably one of LA's greatest prosecutors.
He was highly respected until he tied up with Steve Hodel. That's true. Stephen Kay damaged his reputation by hooking up with Steve Hodel, and in fact, no longer discusses the Black Dahlia case, and in fact, no longer discusses Steve Hodel. The only thing he will say is Steve is wrong in saying that the LAPD covered up the killing of Elizabeth Short. That's the only thing he will say. Otherwise, Steve Kay says zip about Steve Hodel or the Black Dahlia case. And you're going to find that with again and again with the people who got cozy with Steve Hodel. All of a sudden, they back away, and they back away fast. Like James Ellroy. Like, well, I'm getting ahead of the story. Do proceed, Detective Hodel.
And he's active, was on the job, and this is like 2001 now. I go to him in secret, give him all the photographic evidence. I've had question document experts independently look at the handwriting. They've confirmed that many of the notes sent in by the Black Dahlia killer were written and authored by George Hodel.
Did you show them? Did you show Stephen Kay your dad's LAPD file, Steve? Did you happen to show him that? I think the answer is no, I didn't, because I never asked to see it. And you call yourself a detective. It's the one place you ought to look is your dad's file. Never asked to see it.
They've had, I gave a bunch of samples of his handwriting and stuff. All of the witness statements, all of the evidence linking it. And basically, he reviews it in secret for about a month. Comes back and says, okay, he says, very, very fascinating. He says, a lot of these murders, I'd say probably there's a lot of smoke and fire, but he says, I would file, he says, based on your investigation, I would file.
Elizabeth Short and Gene French.
File 2 counts of murder against George Hodel if he were alive and the witnesses were available. He file on the Elizabeth Short Black Dahlia murder, and he file on the Gene French red lipstick murder. So those two, he says, a lot of the others look very suspicious, but he says, I have a high, qualifying criteria for filing a case.
Based on this evidence is the line, Steve.
I would file those and I would win them.
Oh, I would love to get you in court. I would love to get you on the witness stand. I would love to get you on the witness stand, Detective Hodel. We would have a good old time, and you would be going an awful lot. And I wouldn't let you veer off into, but you have to understand what a remarkable man my father was. Nah, these guys are letting you slide.
Court in a jury trial. So based on that, I said, okay, well, I knew I had made my case anyway, because that's what I did for a living.
Another weird Steve Hodel laugh. Boy, he's feeling no pain in this episode.
4 years. So with that, I went public with it. The book came out in the first book, Black Dahlia Avenger, came out in '03.
Shake that moneymaker.
See, a lot of publicity. I was on, Dateline did an hour piece, 48 Hours did an hour piece. A lot of controversy.
Retired homicide detective discovers that dead dad is serial killer. Well, maybe not. Welcome to naysayer number one, Larry Harnisch. We're almost there.
A lot of people upset and saying, don't mess with my NIF, and said, oh, this is a daddy dearest.
It is a daddy dearest. It is.
But the evidence was there, and I knew I'd made the case.
No.
So that was in '03.
And the credentials are there as well.
Say again?
And the credentials are there as well.
Yeah, well, Steve kind of trashed his credentials there, Ed. Steve is a pariah within the LAPD at this point. Oh dear, how unfortunate.
But they,
Yeah.
We trusted you to work on 300 homicide cases. Let's give you the benefit of the doubt on this one as well.
Why would we do that, Ed? Ed, you are disappointing me here. You are not doing a good interview.
Well, yeah, but what's incredible is that
Top.
So the book comes out and a lot of controversy, and that blasts open some secret files in the DA's vault.
Let me point out, because Steve's going to start talking about the district attorney's files. The district attorney investigated the handling of the Black Dahlia case because there was this rogue investigation within the police department by the police psychiatrist, Paul DeRiver, and the gangster squad. Totally unrelated to the homicide division, the guys who were supposed to be investigating it. It was this rogue investigation. They did it on their own. It involved this poor schlub named Leslie Dillon, who I won't get into right now. It blew up. Leslie Dillon, of course, did not kill Elizabeth Short. And so it was a big, fat mess. And the Los Angeles County grand jury said, this is kind of a black eye for everybody. Why don't we investigate it? And as a matter of fact, grand jury investigations are by law secret. Those files are by law sealed. Okay? That's how they are. There's nothing nefarious about it. That's how grand juries work. Grand juries still work that way. It isn't a secret who testifies, and you will see in the news coverage that reporters were outside the grand jury room reporting on who went in and who was testifying. That wasn't secret. It's just the content of what they said, what they testified. That was secret. And as I said, by law, grand jury proceedings are secret. They are sealed. That's how they work, which you are never, ever, ever going to hear from Detective 3, Steve Hodel. Was he ever a cop? You have to wonder.
Hidden away for 60 years. And we get into those files, and they're the Black Dahlia Hodel files. And what we find out is
they bugged his house. They bugged his house for about 5.5 weeks. They decided it's a big yawn, we're out of here. And that's what really happened.
Independent of my investigation, George Hodel was the prime suspect.
No, he was never the prime suspect. That is more Steve World bullshit. Was he a suspect? Yes. Was he ever the prime suspect? No, not a day of his life was he the prime suspect. Only in Steve World.
Along by the DA and LAPD. He was the number one suspect.
No.
These files were locked away and hidden.
Again, grand jury files are by law secret. That's how it works. They're supposed to be secret. Nothing nefarious about it at all. Nothing.
And this, of course, Steve Hodel can talk about the case and the evidence for 25 hours.
He certainly can. He can do.
And it's still Steve Hodel, the son of the killer, claiming this, right?
Yep. That it's true.
But here now you have document transcripts. And what we find out is this. We find out in 1950, in February, starting on February 15th of 1950, the DA, what had happened was the 1949 grand jury took the...
Okay, let's hear Steve's explanation of what I just told you. What I told you is what actually happened. Let's see what he says.
Case away from LAPD.
No. The grand jury did not take the case away from the LAPD. That is not how grand juries work. That is not how the LAPD works. That is total bullshit. And the reason Steve says that is because he knows the average person doesn't know how the grand jury system works. He assumes that people will actually think he knows what he's talking about when it's a complete lie. That's a lie. What he just said was a lie.
He said something stinks here. None of these lone woman murders are being solved. We're turning them over for the DA's office to investigate.
No, none of that's true. The bulk of the district attorney's files, which I have read, which I copied generally, are devoted to the Leslie Dillon debacle. The most of the testimony deals with Dillon. There is some other stuff in there. There are a lot of false leads and whatnot. The district attorney's office kind of got involved in looking at a couple of suspects, but no, the LAPD was always in charge of that case. Harry Hansen was the lead detective. He was on that case from the day he went to the crime scene to the day he retired in the 1960s. It was never out of his hands. It was always assigned to him. This is all Steve Hodel bullshit.
Now, the DA here is a separate agency from LAPD. There's the city police, and then they're the county prosecutors.
Well, Steve got that right.
So they took it away.
No, that didn't happen.
My knowledge, this has never happened before.
Well, it didn't even happen then, Steve. Not only has it never happened before, it has never happened at all. Oh, Steve thinks everybody is just stupid and knows nothing about the legal system.
Or since they've actually taken a case away from it.
That didn't happen. That's utter crap.
LAPD and turned it over for another jurisdiction to investigate. But that's what they did.
No. What Steve is saying is a total lie. None of it's true. Nope.
And like I say, you got to understand that there was a lot of corruption. You got to understand.
No, you don't have to understand that because there wasn't. More Steve Hodel lies.
History of the city. I mean, it puts Chicago to shame in some ways.
No, it doesn't. Just the opposite. The LAPD had some problems in the 1930s, primarily due to job selling. You bought your job. And there was a cleanup of Los Angeles City administration in 1938. There was a recall of the mayor. A lot of people were laid off or whatever, fired, what have you, resigned. And there was a new police chief. He was the reformed police chief, Arthur Homan. He took office, as I recall, in the late 30s and was chief into the early 1940s. He's the guy you have to thank for the new badge, the current design of the LAPD badge, because they had been handing out the old badges, the juice badges. Everybody and their brother had one. And so he came up with the new badge design, and the LAPD is very guarded with what happens to the authentic LAPD badges. Okay. Homan steps down for various reasons. He's replaced by C.B. Hodel. And C.B. Hodel is the World War II police chief. He had a very tough time. He lost a lot of LAPD personnel who went into the military. He had to hire a lot of guys who otherwise wouldn't make the cut, who otherwise wouldn't qualify to be regular LAPD officers. They were designated war emergency police officers. So the World War II is over. Various things happen. There is the Brenda Allen scandal, which involved Vice. Okay. Brenda Allen was never, ever suspected of killing anybody. She was never, ever investigated by the homicide division. She was investigated by Vice. As a result of Brenda Allen and other things. Hodel resigned, and they brought in a Marine general named William Wharton. He was acting chief for about a year. And his mission, he was charged with cleaning up the department, investigating the department, see what's going on. So he did a lot of internal affairs investigation. And Wharton, the Marine general, the outsider, said, yeah, well, we found a few bad apples, but generally the LAPD is a pretty good department. And so that set the stage for the new chief, who was either going to be, the two top finishers were William Parker and Thad Brown. And that is what really happened. Steve isn't going to tell you any of that, but I will. The LAPD was no nonsense when it came to crime. They were notorious for having detectives posted at Union Station and later on at the airport. And if a guy that they didn't like, a known gangster, let's say, showed up, they would put him back on the train and send him out of town. They were notorious for doing that kind of stuff. So was the LAPD corrupt? Nah. I mean, it had other problems in terms of like brutality. If you were a person of color, you might not be a fan of the LAPD, but in terms of being for sale, no, definitely not.
Was a very corrupt cop.
No.
Were running vice operations, prostitution, gambling.
Nope. And again, let me point out, Steve is depending on people's ignorance to know, okay, vice is one thing, homicide is something else. They're totally different.
And basically, we didn't have a mafia out here. We had the
little laughs.
cops doing it.
No, that's not true either. That is total bullshit.
They were in charge, and they weren't about to let the mafia take over.
None of that's true. Not a word of that's true. You might find, you could find gambling in LA until Las Vegas got going, because Las Vegas was a lot better. You might find gambling in unincorporated LA County, which was under the jurisdiction of the sheriff department. But in terms of the city of LA, no.
So basically, about half the department was corrupt, but
this is just Steve fantasy. Steve is just pulling this out of his nose at this point.
The other half was good. So basically, what happened was they gave the case to a Lieutenant Jemison, who was...
No, they didn't. Okay, let me point out again. This was grand jury testimony. Jemison, generally what he did was he investigated on behalf of the various prosecutors. Is this witness in town? Is this witness going to say what we expect the witness to say? The way the district attorney works is, okay, the police arrest somebody. They do all their paperwork. They submit that case to the district attorney. The district attorney reviews those reports and says, yeah, we're going to charge this guy. No, we're not going to charge this guy. And so that's how the district attorney works. In conjunction with that, they do have the grand jury, which will investigate various things. Every grand jury investigates something, and it isn't always, murder or whatever. They can investigate all kinds of stuff. Anyway, grand jury proceedings are secret. Anyway, Jemison's job is to, he might do some investigating for the grand jury. Again, he might make sure that witnesses are available and that kind of stuff, but he is by no means a homicide investigator. And when you read his reports, you can see, yeah, he was not really an ace investigator. Although in his report, he says George Hodel is not a suspect. Everything that we did tends to eliminate him. Steve won't tell you that either, or if he does, he'll kind of talk around it. Okay. Proceed, Detective Hodel.
The head of the DA's investigative bureau of investigation.
No, he wasn't even the head. I think the guy's name was Stanley. H.L. Stanley, I think, was the head of it. I think Jemison reported to somebody, and I think it was H.L. Stanley. And that is your law enforcement trivia for the day.
And he assigns 18 detectives 24/7 around the clock And they pick up George Hodel, take him down to the Hall of Justice, and say, "We want to talk to you. We understand you knew Elizabeth Short." And while they're talking to him at the Hall of Justice, they break into the Franklin House, this Mayan temple, and put microphones.
Not wiretaps, microphones. Okay. What happened was, I'm pretty sure these investigators were from the LAPD and not from the district attorney's office. I'm not sure the district attorney's office had the kind of staffing to do what Steve says was done. What happened was, the upshot was that they did put microphones in the Sowden house. They did pick up conversations and whatnot. And let Steve tell the story here.
In the walls, not bugs in the phone, but these are actual hard microphones. They hide them inside the walls. They run a hard line from the basement all the way to Hollywood police station.
No, they didn't do that. They used telephone wires. God, how was this guy ever a detective? He's just a menace with any sort of detail at all.
Down into the basement there. 2 detectives. They got 18 detectives assigned 24/7. So two detectives at a time around the clock are sitting there tape recording and listening to live conversations.
It's wire, Steve. It's not tape. Wire. Wire recorder. Wire.
Stations with Dad and his accomplices and friends and whatever.
Run on a hard line? On a hard wire?
Yeah. On a hard wire, they'd run it from the house along Pac-Bell telephone lines.
Yeah. It was a telephone line, Steve. It was not they didn't run the wire all the way. It was a telephone line. Steve may actually get this detail right with a little prompting from Ed.
Oh my God.
And they, yeah.
That's
and they
job, yeah.
got, well, they probably hooked into the existing lines.
All right.
There you go. You actually got it right. Thank you, Ed, for pushing Steve towards some kind of accuracy.
Yeah. And ran it to the station. Anyway, they're sitting there listening and tape recording.
Wire. It's a fucking wire recorder, Steve. Why can't you get it right? It is a simple detail.
And they do this for 40 days, 24/7, around the clock. And let me just read you a few of the statements they get in his conversations.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about how Steve cherry picks these items from the alleged transcripts, because he does. He will say, the classic example is where one of the guys who's doing the surveillance says, "Hey, I'm having trouble with the equipment." And Steve turns that into George saying, "I'm in trouble." I mean, Steve is a shameless liar. The other thing is that George Hodel, we have established he's smart. He knew the house was bugged. He said a lot of outrageous things, hoping to bait the cops. The other thing he did, and this is human nature. If you knew somebody was listening, if you knew somebody had put microphones in your house, what would you do? You'd say outrageous things to bait them, which he did, and then you would cover up any kind of conversation with, I don't know, music. And so George Hodel played the radio a lot. And in fact, the guys doing the surveillance say, oh my God, Hodel is listening to Chinese music. It's worse than the Mexican music. And there actually are quotes. That is a direct quote from the surveillance, which Steve will not tell you. George Hodel spends a lot of time typing also. And that will be important if Steve keeps going in the direction he's going now.
He's talking to a Baron. I later
Pringa.
A Baron Haringa, who was a close friend of his. And, he's saying to him, this is a quote. These are actually the transcripts I'm reading. "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." And I find out he was investigated by LAPD for suspicion of murdering his secretary.
No. Another total lie. What Steve Hodel just said is a lie. George Hodel's secretary was Ruth Spalding. She committed suicide. There was never anything suspicious about it. You look at her death certificate. What does it say on it? Suicide. Okay, suicide. She killed herself. That does not suit Steve Hodel's purposes, and so he will say, "Oh well, Dad forced her to overdose." And it's like, oh come on, no, there is absolutely zero, and I mean zero, in the district attorney's files about George Hodel being suspected of killing his secretary. That is just Steve Hodel fantasy. Not at all true. Zero.
18 months before the Dahlia murder, she overdosed. They believe it was a forced overdose.
Who believes that? Who believes that there's a forced overdose other than you, Steve? Who is they? A forced overdose. How do you do that? I mean, have you ever given a pill to a cat? How do you force somebody to overdose? This is just insane. And yet people are like, oh, okay, forced overdose, fine. Suspected of killing a secretary, fine. Ed, your skepticism does not impress me, or your lack of skepticism. Very sad.
They were trying to put a case together on him, but he split and went.
No, that's again total bullshit.
To China for a year.
Oh, how awkward. How awkward, Steve. You were living at the Sound House with Papa, but he went for a year to China. Where were you living? Well, Papa was in China. I don't think Steve Hodel is going to get into that. I don't think so.
And they couldn't prove anything, so but he was a murder suspect.
No, he wasn't. No. Totally made up. That's totally fictional.
Before that. And he coughs after that. He says, put a pillow over her head, covered her with a blanket, called Georgia Street Receiving Hospital. She expired at 12:39. They thought there was something fishy.
No, they didn't think there was anything fishy. Ruth Spaulding was taken to Georgia Street Receiving Hospital. It was the main trauma hospital in Los Angeles. She lived for 2 hours once she was there. If you look at the death certificate, it says that they examined her death and they determined it to be a suicide. There was never, ever any suspicion of murder. Zero. No.
Wait, now they may have figured it out, killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary. So that's referring to that Ruth, his secretary Ruth Spaulding earlier. He goes on to say, this is the best payoff I've seen between law enforcement agencies. You don't have the right connections made in the DA's office. Don't.
Yeah. Great example of George Hodel trying to bait the cops. He says things like that. If you're in law enforcement, you can go to such and such a store and get a really good deal on, let's say, clothes or furniture or stuff like that. Oh, yeah. He says that stuff for sure.
Best ever. And we find out later that looks like there was, as I mentioned, this $50,000 payoff on the trial.
What? $50,000 payoff on the trial? Okay. Let's just examine this for a minute, Detective Hodel. $50,000 payoff on the trial of your dad. Okay, fine. Who would have been paid off? Did they bribe the entire jury? Is that what you're saying? They bribed all 12 people and the alternates? I mean, who did they supposedly bribe? Because it wasn't a hung jury. If you were going to bribe somebody, all you would need to do is bribe one person to be a hung juror, and that would be it. Now, the jury reached a unanimous verdict that he was not guilty. It's ridiculous. And there's nothing about that in the district attorney's files either. This is all Steve World fantasy.
He goes on to say, I'm in trouble. Well, he goes on.
Yeah, he doesn't say I'm in trouble. That's a guy having trouble with the equipment. Unbelievable. Steve Hodel is an incredible liar. You just cannot imagine. If you don't know this stuff independently, you can't imagine how much this guy is lying. You just cannot imagine.
Anyway, she hasn't said that she committed the Black Dahlia murder. They're probably watching me. You think we could get some girls to see what they're doing? He talks about performing abortions.
No. George Hodel was opposed to abortion. And the way we know that is because Tamar said so.
At his clinic, well, of course, back then, abortions were illegal, and it was...
Yeah, no, he wasn't doing abortions. George Hodel ran a clinic in what had been Little Tokyo. It was occupied by blacks fleeing the racism of the South, who came to Los Angeles in the Great Diaspora, the Great Migration, and Los Angeles in 1945, 46, 47. In there, Los Angeles was segregated. Black people couldn't live just any place. And so it seemed like the ideal solution because people of Japanese ancestry were in the internment camp. So Little Tokyo's vacant. Hey, we'll have the black people live there. And so that's where George Hodel's clinic was, in Little Tokyo. And his clients were, they had tuberculosis, they had VD. It was just basic public health was what he was doing. He was not doing abortions. No.
He went to prison for 3 to 5 years for an abortion. So
what? Oh, I missed something.
He talks about performing abortions at his clinic. Well, of course, back then, abortions were illegal, and he went to prison for 3 to 5 years for an abortion. So he got after performing a bunch of them at his clinic.
No, he wasn't. That's none of that's true. No.
The last ones before it splits is "I'm in trouble." He mentions the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, the "I'm in trouble" is the guy having trouble with the equipment, and Steve doesn't like that quote, so he just turns it into George saying "I'm in trouble." Total lie.
Mentions passport. Police have a picture of me and that girl. I thought I destroyed all of them. And then he's in the wind, and he disappears. He leaves the country. I'm not sure where he went initially. Mexico, perhaps.
Okay, no, none of that's true either. What happened was the investigators said, okay, 5.5 weeks, we're done. This is boring. Yawn City, we're all done here. And so at that point, George Hodel has a reputation that has been so trashed because of this allegations of molesting Tamar. Even though he was found not guilty, he couldn't get a job. Nobody would hire him. He had to go all the way to Hawaii to find somebody who would hire him. And that's the real story. He was not in the wind. He was not a fugitive. He was not on the run. It was simply, who will hire me? His presence in Hawaii was written up in the newspapers. It was not a secret. If you wanted to find out where George Hodel was, all you had to do was look in the medical directory, and it's like, here's where he is. Here's where people with medical licenses, if they're not in California, here's where their address is now. It's not hard to find people if you know where to look.
Anyway, he's literally leaving the investigators with their microphones up their walls.
They just pulled out. They stopped the surveillance. They said, good night, we're out of here. That's what really happened.
So they pull out, he's gone, and left the country. And so basically, we've got this independent confirmation, all of these transcripts. But the real smoking gun, and the thing that really sealed it was, you say, well, why did, and actually they were, the DA was this Lieutenant Jemison was about to arrest him.
Okay. Let me point out that Jemison rarely arrested anybody. He was not about to sweep in and arrest George Hodel. The job of arresting a suspect in the Black Dahlia case belonged to the LAPD. It was an LAPD case. I think we have seen what happened when somebody poached on the LAPD's case. The arrest was Harry Hansen's to make. Okay, Jemison was not about to swoop in and arrest George Hodel when he fled the country suddenly. That is total Steve Hodel bullshit.
And he split. So basically, but the real smoking gun to all of this occurred on the third day of the transcripts and the stakeout. And Have we got enough time to...
Oh, goody. A woman screams. Blows are heard. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. What Steve is going to say is, oh, the transcript caught this thing about Dad and the Baron go down in the basement. This woman screams, and a pipe is hit, and there's more screaming and more hitting. And Steve will try to tell you that that was a murder. And he will try to tell you that the guys doing surveillance let that happen and didn't respond to it, and they should have. Let's see if he does that. I'm guessing he will.
Get into this. We've got a few minutes.
Oh, yeah. I want to hear it. Yeah.
So basically, I'm going to read your listeners. I'm going to read from the actual transcript that
Ooh! A woman screams.
That's been open. The secret walls have got these transcripts. February 18th, 1950, 7:35. Hodel Franklin House bugging tape, spool number 1. At 4:20, a woman asking for operator several times sounded as though she was crying. 4:25, woman asks for operator again, said something not heard to operator. And before this, there also was some mention about her being intoxicated. Like George Hodel asks her, "Does your husband know you're here? Have another drink." I'm sure he drugged her.
Oh, of course, because that evil genius George is drugging everybody and killing everybody. Okay, I think I know where we're going here. This will be fun for me.
Because she's sounding very intoxicated, she drops the phone, trying to call the operator.
Maybe it was Mom. No, it wasn't Mom. It was another drunk.
Then there's nothing for a number of hours, and then at 8:20, the officer, detectives write, sounded as though the two men went down steps and entered the basement and began digging. Something referred to as not a trace. Heard a pipe getting hit against an object. A woman screams. More hits. A woman screams again. Then goes silent. So I'm reading this. I'm saying, my God, they've got at the very least a serious felony occurring. At the worst, a probable murder. They're listening to it. They're 4 minutes away from the house, and they do nothing.
Yeah. And why do they do nothing, Detective Hodel? Do they want to blow their cover? Do they want to alert the subject of this surveillance that he's being watched, that he is indeed, oh, God. Steve Hodel, Butthurt Hotline. Yeah, Steve, I'm making fun of you again. Oh dear. Yeah. So no, they don't want to blow their cover. So they're not going to do anything. And Steve's going to go, oh, they should have done something. Let's have some more of this story.
Yeah, they're listening to this live.
This is live, yeah. And I'm saying, why aren't they out the door, into their car, over there, and doing a rescue?
Because they're not stupid. That is actually the LAPD training manual on surveillance, on stakeouts, is very clear that you're not supposed to blow your cover if the subject you are watching does something that isn't directly related to the investigation. Don't blow your cover. It's very clear on that. These guys were following procedure. Okay, that's what really happened. They weren't stupid, and I'll have more to say in a little bit.
But they didn't. They took no action. Now, you could come up with a whole bunch of reasons as to why the detectives didn't do anything.
They're not stupid. That's why they didn't do it.
It was the third day of a stakeout. They're thinking, well, we don't want to blow our cover. Maybe this is just kinky sex. Maybe, who knows, what's happening, and maybe it's just,
maybe
who knows? I don't know. I can't justify it, but I know what I would have done. But they.
Yeah. You would have blown the cover. You would have blown the surveillance. Sure, you would. How did you become Detective 3, Steve? Were you ever on a stakeout? Did you ever conduct surveillance like that? I would love to know.
Didn't. And so then what happens? And then basically it's all quiet, and that's that. And then it goes on for another 37 days of.
Okay. Now, Steve Hodel just said, Oh, there was a murder on this recording and the cops didn't do anything. And he leaves it at that. And it's like, okay, Detective 3 Hodel, this woman was killed in the Souden house. Fine. Who is she? What's her name? What did they do with the body? Was it ever reported in the newspaper that she was missing or that she was murdered? Was she ever found? No. You got a murder victim there. Who the hell is she? What's her name? What did they do with the body? Okay. And what do you typically do after you kill somebody? Do you start typing? Because that's what George Hodel did. When you go through the rest of the transcript, you see that after that incident, there's typing. Yeah. Nothing about getting rid of the body, nothing like that at all. Nah. It's just they were trying to fake out the detectives, and that's it.
Fake out. And they get these statements. So basically, all I can figure is, and we know that they believed a murder occurred because...
We don't know that at all. We do not know that.
There are other reports in the investigation in the secret file that shows that they followed up. They got the plumber and said, did you see graves or digging in the basement? Did you see signs of digging? This is like 3 or 4 days after this incident. And
he said no.
Put a physical stake out and followed that. So clearly they...
Yeah. The plumber said no, he didn't notice anything. Steve isn't going to tell you that.
He suspected that, she was killed and possibly buried at the house. So...
What's her name, Steve? Presumably somebody would miss her. Somebody would notice that she was missing. Somebody would file a missing persons report, and it would get handled to the cops. Don't you think? What's her name? Tell me. Who was it?
Do you know who that woman was?
Oh, Ed, you surprised me. You actually asked a good question.
No, she said that, she was killed and possibly buried at the house. So,
do you know who that woman was?
No, she was killed and possibly buried at the house. So,
do you know who that woman was?
No, he doesn't know. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for that. Good question. That one was actually good.
We don't know who she is. She was never identified. So,
if she was killed, even. Steve's going to talk quickly to get over that one.
Basically, fast forward, Dad split. He's left the country. Now, you also have to kind of understand the history of Los Angeles at that very time. At the very time this is all going on, the tape recordings, William H. Parker, Chief Parker, who becomes our great...
You know what? I'm going to take a little break. I'll be back later. Bye for now.